Investigators seek a serial bomber whose targets crisscross New York State. 4 deadly explosions in 90 minutes leave only vague clues to the bomber's identity. Detectives in Florida rush to the scene of a massive explosion at a lavish estate. Somewhere in the twisted wreckage lie clues that will lead them to the killer. Bomb investigators must piece together the shattered remains of an intricate puzzle. Every long and grueling bombing investigation begins with a short fuse. Eleanor Fowler of West Valley, New York, had no idea the phone call she received a few days after Christmas in 1993 would be a prelude to death. A delivery service asked for directions to her house so they could deliver a package. Suspicious, Eleanor called the police. They told her anonymous packages aren't a crime, and there was nothing they could do. Eleanor accepted the box with reluctance. She cut into it and removed the crumpled newspaper. Inside, she found a toolbox. Whoever sent it didn't include a note. She flipped the latch and lifted the lid, triggering a fatal explosion. Eleanor Fowler was the first victim in what was to become a statewide serial bombing. 5 more bombs, concealed inside identical toolboxes, were delivered throughout northern and western New York within 90 minutes. 4 of the bombs exploded, killing 5 and injuring 2. Investigators from 3 New York offices of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, along with their national response team, followed the trail of explosions to each bomb site. The ATF is the federal agency assigned to investigate bombings. Special Agent Scott Sammis of the Rochester Bureau of the ATF was one of the first agents to respond.
The investigation starts on December 28th, 1993, when I receive a phone call from my supervisor, who tells me to respond to Buffalo. He's had several bombings, possibly several deaths. Please come out there and assist. I'm in Rochester. I'm an hour and a half away. He then calls me back a few minutes later and asks me to stay in Rochester because there's just been a detonation in Rochester with possibly some deaths there.
The 4 simultaneous bombings would stretch the limits of the ATF and other law enforcement agencies. At each scene, investigators' first task was to find every piece of evidence, no matter how small, no matter how inconsequential it looked. It was too soon to tell what might point them to the person who sent the deadly packages. Much of the evidence consisted of small fragments coated with explosive residue. To determine what kind of explosive was used, the evidence at each scene was bagged and sent to forensic chemist Doug Klapek. at the ATF laboratories in Rockville, Maryland.
Well, in this case, we had to make sure that everything not only was stored separately up in Rochester, but was shipped separately down here. And different people were handling different parts of evidence. Even though things were already in airtight containers, we wanted to make sure that was the case.
As the lab processed the evidence, investigators tried to trace the packages. The bomber used local delivery services and the U.S. mail, making the parcels difficult to trace. Unaware of their deadly cargo, the unsuspecting drivers made their rounds. The packages, weighing about 16 pounds, looked harmless enough. How could the delivery people know they were laden with death? Not all the bombs reached their targets. When one driver tried to deliver a package to Corrections Officer Scott Kemp at the New York State Penitentiary, he learned Kemp wasn't working. The penitentiary couldn't accept the package. Aggravated at the delay it would cause him to redeliver it another time, he threw the box into the back of his van. Through sheer luck, the bomb didn't detonate. This bomb and another that malfunctioned were disarmed by the Erie County Sheriff's Bomb Squad. They provided investigators with an important break in the case. They now could look at how the bombs were built.
Inside this device, after it is tripped by opening it up, this would trip the device. Not doing the latch, but opening it up like this would trip the device, like that. That would cause the detonator to explode inside here and hit this about 4 pounds of dynamite. Also included inside of this device was about 11.5 pounds of shrapnel. And these shrapnel pieces were of 28 different varieties.
Propelled by the dynamite, each piece of shrapnel travels 10 times faster than a bullet. Moving at 14 to 15,000 feet per second, the shards can tear through solid concrete. Explosives are grouped in two categories: high explosives and low explosives. High explosives like dynamite and C4 are the most powerful. They are used commercially for demolition and excavation and for military applications. Very stable to work with, high explosives require a great amount of force, a detonator, to set them off. Low explosives include the flash powder used in firecrackers and smokeless powder used in shotgun shells. They're easier to ignite than high explosives and are the explosive of choice for amateur bombers. By looking at the degree of destruction at the New York bomb scenes, investigators knew immediately that it was caused by high explosives. James Crippen, a 9-year veteran with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, trains law enforcement agencies to conduct bomb investigations at the scene and in the lab. He's seen his share of the havoc wrought by high explosives.
Certainly a pound of C4 is going to do a whole lot more damage than a pound of black powder. You know, a pound of black powder, you know, make a pretty good bomb, but, you know, a pound of C4 will, you know, can devastate a building. I mean, you're talking a difference in detonation velocity of anywhere from 1,200 to maybe 1,800 feet per second for black powder to in the neighborhood of 25,000 feet per second for C4. So there's a lot more force involved, a lot more shattering force.
But sometimes people can survive a bomb blast, even from a high explosive. Roosevelt Town resident William Lazore was a target of the New York serial bomber, but his suspicion saved his life. When Lazore picked up his package from the post office, the clerk joked that it might be a bomb. Though the clerk was trying to be funny, Lazor was careful enough to open the toolbox with his rake. That added bit of distance and caution saved his life when the bomb exploded. Several hundred miles away in Cheektowaga, Robert Fowler was less fortunate. Eleanor Fowler's husband received his package at work. These pictures were taken from a surveillance camera that captures a still image every few seconds. They count down the final moments in the lives of Robert Fowler and his co-worker, John O'Donnell. Just before the explosion, another co-worker, Jeffrey Camp, offered to open the package with his pocket knife. The blast was so powerful, it threw Fowler some 15 feet down the hallway. Miraculously, Camp survived and can be seen fleeing the scene for help. 6 bombs, 4 explosions, 4 counties in New York State. Each unexploded bomb was nearly identical, packaged in a toolbox and mailed from Buffalo. The bombing shared another element. All the intended victims were related.
All the family members are interviewed. There were other family members who were not targeted, who were found and interviewed, and who survived. And everyone was asked, who do you think might have done this? And everybody said, well, Mike Stevens. Maybe he did it.
56-year-old Mike Stevens had a girlfriend named Brenda Shavir. Everyone targeted in the bombing was related to Brenda. The connection might have been a coincidence, except for one more revealing detail. 3 months earlier, the Monroe County Sheriff's bomb squad told Sammis that a restaurant manager near Rochester found more than 100 sticks of dynamite near a dumpster. The code numbers on the dynamite matched the dynamite in the unexploded bombs. Investigators traced the numbers to the Kentucky Powder Company. The firm, housed in a quarry, sold blasting supplies. Employees gave Sammis a description of a man who had purchased 55 pounds of dynamite and 50 blasting caps 4 months earlier. Sammis's investigation revealed this man to be Earl Figley, a close friend of Mike Stevens. Sammis questioned Figley. Presented with all the evidence implicating him, Figley confessed that he and Stevens made the bombs and sent them to Brenda's family. Figley explained Stevens' motivation. Mike wanted to exact revenge on his girlfriend's family for not accepting him.
The relationship between the two started becoming strained, and Mike started tapping her phone calls. And just as in any relationship, your own family is going to support you in your relationship with another person. And that's what happened in this case. Things weren't going well. Family members of Brenda would tell her, if it's not working out, why don't you get out of the relationship?
Police had enough evidence to arrest both Earl Figley and Mike Stevens, but they still had to build a case that could not be beaten in court. For that, they needed hard evidence to convict Mike Stevens. In New York in 1994, detectives continued to follow every lead as they built their case against a serial bomber. While Mike Stevens and Earl Figley were in jail, the ATF National Response Team searched Figley's hotel room. They found boxes identical to the ones used to send the bombs. A tip led ATF agents and the Rochester Police Bomb Squad to a cache of evidence in a storage locker Stevens had rented several months earlier.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Inside the locker, police uncovered dynamite and blasting caps.
Got it, Madeline?
The explosives provided the ATF and other agencies with the ammunition they needed in their case against Stevens. But the incriminating evidence didn't stop with the explosives.
The disguise that Earl Figley wore.
They also recovered disguises Figley wore when he purchased equipment and mailed the bombs: a wig, beard, and theatrical makeup.
And a beard and a mustache.
They also found the books Stevens and Figley studied to learn how to construct the deadly weapons. The fact that these books exist represents the risk we take living in a free society, according to bomb expert James Crippen.
The information has always been around on how to build devices. That's one of the things that we live with in the United States, because we have a very rigid view of freedom of information, no matter how much trouble it's going to cause us down the road. And I certainly agree with that point of view that, you don't want to restrict information. You just hope that people will use it responsibly.
Besides the explosives and books found in storage, investigators also found tools in Stevens' home. And like most everything else used in a crime, tools can be traced. At the ATF laboratory in Rockville, Maryland, forensic investigators carefully studied wire cutters they found in Stevens' home. Toolmark specialists had to match the wire cutters with the marks they made on the wires found in all the bombs. Toolmark examiner Elizabeth Gillis.
When you have two tools that come off the production line one after the other, they're each going to have their own individuality, their own individual marks, so that when you do make a test cut with the tools, you can put them on the microscope and be able to differentiate between which tool made which mark.
First, Gillis cuts a piece of wire using the cutter she wants to test. The wire is the same type found in the evidence. Investigators must make dozens of cuts with the tool in order to study the angle, contact area, and other attributes of the cut. Only then can they match a wire with the tool that cut it. She places the test cut under a microscope, orienting it to the appropriate angle so that she can compare the test cut with the wire found in evidence. She then superimposes the two images to see if the two cut patterns match. In the case of Mike Stevens, investigators made a successful match. The wires used in all the bombs had been cut by the wire cutters found in the basement of Stevens' house. While the books, wires, and tools helped investigators tighten their grip on Mike Stevens, they still wanted one more piece of evidence. They needed to establish a connection between the explosives and the suspect.
People think that when a bomb goes off and blows up, that everything goes away. There's nothing further from the truth. When you have an explosion, all the explosive material is converted into a gaseous state that actually is consumed in the explosion. Well, that will go out as a heated gas, and when it hits other objects, it will cool down and start coating those objects, such as metal or clothing or wood or whatever. So not only will you have unreacted particles of explosives, but you'll have this gaseous film that's developed on other objects that you can test and get the residues from.
At the ATF lab in Rockville, Maryland, Doug Klapek analyzed residue from the bomb scene to determine the kind of explosive used. Once identified, Klapek tried to match it with evidence collected from Mike Stevens. The residue from explosives evaporates quickly, so samples of the debris were packed in airtight canisters. To test for explosive residue, Klapek had to capture it as it dissipated. He prepared a charcoal-filled pipette, which he then inserted into the top of the canister. The apparatus was then attached to a vacuum. As the canister was gently heated, air was drawn out through the pipette. The charcoal inside the pipette grabbed the chemical components from the evidence. These chemicals were analyzed to see what explosive they came from. The test confirmed that dynamite was the explosive used in these bombs. Next, Klepek had to prove that Stevens and Figley had recently handled dynamite. If they had, its residue would have remained on their clothes.
I found off of Stevens' boots and his clothes ethylene glycol dinitrate, which is only found in dynamite. There's no commercial use other than in dynamite for this material.
Investigators had made their case. They had matched Stevens and Figley to explosives and the tools used to make the bombs. Any missing details were sewn together by Earl Figley himself. With this evidence, ATF agents determined that Mike Stevens constructed 6 bombs in the Rochester hotel room with the help of Earl Figley. In fact, to shift blame from himself, Stevens made sure Figley played a significant role in the murders.
Mike Stevens was using Earl to do all his dirty work for him. And he was successful, I guess, for a few hours anyway, but not for very long.
Stevens' motive was vengeance. He was determined to make Brenda Shavir's family pay for rejecting him. To be certain the bombs were fatal, he loaded each with shrapnel.
There is no doubt in my mind that these devices were designed to kill somebody upon opening. They were a strictly booby-trap device addressed to a specific person.
In order to make the bombs harder to trace, Stevens stuffed the packages with newspapers from Buffalo, so it would appear the packages were sent from there, not from his home in Rochester. In court, Figley implicated Mike Stevens, then pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Convicted of the deaths of 5 people, Stevens was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms. Most times, when a bomb detonates, it begins an agonizing catastrophe. But in a small town in Georgia, explosions are an everyday occurrence. Worldwide, the number of bombings is increasing every year. An alcohol, tobacco, and firearms study revealed that from 1990 to 1994, the number of reported bombings nearly doubled in the United States alone. Pete Maston, head of ATF training, has investigated explosions for more than 30 years.
Well, the typical bomber is perhaps the ultimate coward. The typical bomber doesn't face, nor do they want to face their opponent. They would much prefer to use whatever subterfuge and cover they can.
To make sure these criminals are brought to justice, the ATF brings young investigators and students to this testing ground in Brunswick, Georgia, to teach them how to catch a bomber. Here, the ATF trains evidence technicians, fire investigators, schematic artists, and explosives technicians. At the academy, each skill is refined by repetition. On this day, ATF bomb scene instructors will test their students' knowledge by detonating 3 car bombs, simulating real crime scenes. The men building and packaging these explosives are highly trained experts. Their job is as delicate as it is dangerous. One cannot underestimate the power of the explosive materials. That's why, in inexperienced hands, bomb-making information can be a recipe for disaster, as instructor Larry Casey explains.
All that information that's available doesn't have proper safety precautions in it, and the learning skills of sequential assembly processes, things that are important to know for safety reasons, are totally missing there. So they're always at great risk to blow themselves up. And we oftentimes will get a call and you'll find the tragic aftermath in a garage or someplace where the kids were doing experimentation, and what you get are pieces of bodies and tools scattered around, and death and destruction, and that's the sad part of this.
Instructors at the academy begin the training session by building pipe bombs. These bombs are not mock-ups, they are real. The explosive powder must be filled with great care. Just a few grains stuck in the pipe thread could trigger a blast. A small spark or even static electricity could ignite the powder. For the test, the bomb is placed so the end caps shoot into the engine compartment and the back seat, making the work of finding them more of a challenge for the students.
So that big high-pressure end cap should go right into that radio area.
So it's fore and aft kind of at this angle?
Yeah.
Okay.
When everyone has cleared the area, it's time for detonation. After the explosion, ATF investigators inspect the wreckage. Some of the lighter fragments were propelled hundreds of feet into the woods, creating a huge area to investigate. These fragments provide the students with valuable clues about the makeup of the bomb and where it was placed inside the car. In the field, nothing can be overlooked. Investigators have only one chance to gather evidence.
Once the scene is released, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible in some cases, to come back into that scene or to recreate that scene hours, days, or weeks later. So it's a one-shot opportunity for perfection.
It quickly becomes evident how destructive these small pipe bombs can be. This explosion was so powerful that part of the cardboard carton pierced the car's steel door.
It's difficult to tell.
Smaller holes.
Other fragments sliced through the roof as if it were foil.
These holes are larger because the pieces didn't fragment as much.
Instructors prepare the next bomb by mixing several low explosives into one powerful cocktail. The work is nerve-wracking. The powder must be tamped into the pipe and the detonator delicately taped to the loaded bomb. In some cases, the seat cushions are wetted down to prevent fire from destroying evidence the students will need to work with. The final package is ready to detonate. After the explosions, the students divide into teams. The team leader assigns each person to a task.
Charlie, Ray, Rick, Frank, Joe. And Colin's going to kind of be the overseer of that group. What you found, if you feel like you found something that's a really critical piece of evidence that's going to give us particularly the guys that are on the car, to give them an idea on what the device is, to help them look more deeply into certain things. Let's bring that up.
The students work together to investigate the bomb scene. In the field, ATF agents have to work quickly and under a great deal of pressure. Students are taught early on they will have to work with state and local authorities, laboratory technicians, and most importantly, each other to solve a crime. One team begins its work by forming a perimeter around the scene. Then they divide the area into quadrants before they begin their search for fragments.
Hey, Jim?
Just let him.
Colin. Here's your, this looks like the piece of the end cap, right?
The students walk along the tarmac, advancing as a team so they don't miss any shard of evidence. Each piece is then identified with a chalk circle or a small orange cone and assigned a number. In an explosive scene like this, evidence numbers can reach into the thousands. One team member records the identification number and exact location of each piece of evidence. Distances between the fragments are measured to plot their location. Another team closely inspects the damage inside the car. Their job is to figure out which fragments are part of the car and which may be parts of the bomb. For many of the students, this is the first time they have seen a bomb's devastation up close. It won't be their last. And while the damage to the car looks complete, valuable evidence remains embedded in the wreckage. Hatchets, hammers, and crowbars are brought in to pull these clues from the vehicle. The car is literally dissected as students search for pieces of the bomb lodged in or behind the dashboard. They never know where they might find the most significant piece of evidence. The students then move the car and search underneath. Bombs explode in all directions, and clues typically become embedded in the asphalt. Inspectors then sweep up what remains of the scene. The debris is then carefully sifted through a thin wire screen to separate any small clues that may have been overlooked. Instructors intensify the pressure and pump up the realism by adding a chaotic element to the bomb scene. They're called survivors. Role players portray panicked victims and family members whose loved ones have been killed or injured in the blast. The scenarios are built on actual occurrences. The students must learn to be firm but compassionate in the emotionally charged atmosphere. As the actors rush toward the bombed-out car, they're stopped by students who must be able to comfort them and keep them clear of the investigation. Once the scene is cleared, it is photographed and videotaped. Fragments are then collected and sent to a lab. These thorough investigation methods must be learned if the students ever hope to catch a bomber.
You've got to be able to prove your investigation in a court of law. And most of the time, that takes forensic evidence that puts the bomb in the hands of the bomber.
In the classroom, they get an anatomy lesson, learning the vital parts of a bomb. Tape, pipe, detonator, and wires are all carefully examined as the students begin to piece together the evidence gathered outside at the bombing scene. The need for well-trained ATF investigators is crucial for crime solving. Usually, when a bomb goes off, the bomber is miles away. But in a case in Florida, he struck frighteningly close to home. On July 9, 1985, two deafening explosions, seconds apart, rocked a quiet suburban neighborhood in Naples, Florida. The Collier County Sheriff's deputies immediately arrived at the scene. But the explosion had already taken the lives of two people. Matron of the wealthy Benson and Hedges tobacco family, Margaret Benson, and her adopted son Scott were killed. Margaret's daughter, Carol Lynn, was critically injured. The sheriff's office knew this type of devastation was no accident. They called the ATF for help. Special Agent Ralph Ostrowski worked the investigation.
In my 22 years with ATF, particularly my time in Cleveland, when I worked a lot of organized crime, bombings, vehicle bombings, this was without a doubt the worst vehicle bombing I had ever seen.
Ostrowski and his team immediately set out to discover what caused the destruction. Debris from the exploded Chevy Suburban was spread for yards around.
Oftentimes, especially in a bombing of this magnitude, debris can be spread hundreds of feet well beyond what you think it would be.
ATF agents worked with police to establish a procedure to conduct the evidence gathering. The agents had done this many times before, and they knew this case was going to take a lot of time to solve.
So by the second or third day, needless to say, the scene got to be very, very tedious to work. The agents were forced to wear masks because of the stench, and they did an excellent job in recovering as much of the evidence as they did recover.
Every fragment was marked. Chalk outlined where pieces of debris landed after the explosion. It didn't take long to discover the probable cause of the explosion. They found pieces of large metal pipes that weren't automobile parts. The ATF was confident the vehicle was destroyed by a powerful pipe bomb, but they now had to determine how it was constructed and who planted it.
The vehicle was absolutely destroyed. This was a large vehicle, a 1978 the Chevy Suburban. The top of it was peeled back with two 27-pound pipe bombs in a contained vehicle. The force of the explosion did a great deal of damage.
B6.
As the evidence continued to accumulate, agents began questioning witnesses.
Like I said, I went ahead and...
The first person they spoke with was Stephen Benson, the only family member to escape injury.
Escorted them in the car.
His mother and his brother had been killed. His sister was fighting for her life in a hospital, yet police reported that Stephen Benson's demeanor was perfectly calm, even upbeat. This raised the suspicions of Collier County Captain Tom Storer.
My suspicions were aroused immediately that something is not right in what was going on. It just wasn't consistent with a catastrophic event that had just occurred.
Within 24 hours of the explosion, Stephen Benson stopped talking directly with police. All questions filtered through his attorney. Though suspicious about Stephen Benson, investigators had to be careful not to jump to conclusions. So far, they had no solid evidence for or against Benson's involvement. It was too early in the game to launch accusations, and they had no time to waste following a false trail.
Okay, we'll be in touch with you. Okay, thank you.
We follow the evidence wherever that evidence is going to take us. If we focus on one subject and use all of our resources on that one subject and we happen to be wrong, then we've wasted very valuable time early on in the investigation when it's probably one of the most critical periods.
Back at the sheriff's office, investigators began to study all the evidence from the scene, including pieces of electronic circuitry and batteries, elements of a trigger device. They knew that whoever planted the bomb had some expertise in assembling electronics. Ralph Ostrowski and Jack Gant began to study a schematic artist's map of the explosion, giving them a clear look at the epicenter and direction of the blast.
The purpose of these sketches that we're looking at here today is to assist the investigator when he testifies in court. He'll be asked by the defense where each piece of these articles were picked up, and he must be able to testify that he picked these articles up in a location around the car. He must be able to provide testimony of what this article is. He must be able to tell the date and time he got it and identify it later, that this is the item that he picked up the particular day of the crime. Without that testimony, this evidence cannot be used in court.
The schematic shows where every speck of evidence was found after the blast. Their small size and great distance from the car are testament to the tremendous power of the explosion as it tore through the vehicle. Once the maps were drawn and the evidence was collected, the investigation moved north. Fragments gathered at the scene were taken to the ATF laboratory in Atlanta, Georgia. Here, investigators would try to make sense of the twisted wreckage of the vehicle. Forensic chemist Walter Mitchell, a 26-year veteran of the ATF, started with a visual inspection of the fragments. Through the microscope, Mitchell studied the small wafer-like specks clinging to the sample. He tentatively identified the particles as smokeless powder. To confirm he was dealing with smokeless powder, Mitchell had to test it chemically using a process called thin layer chromatography. First, he coated a sheet of glass with an absorbent layer. Then he placed dots of the smokeless powder and his unknown sample on it. The glass was dipped into a tank of solvent. As the solvent was drawn up the absorbent layer, it carried with it small quantities of the dissolved powders. If the powders were the same, they'd migrate the same distance up the glass, forming streaks of identical length and color. Mitchell removed and dried it. Then he put the glass under ultraviolet light to compare the colors of the streaks. In this case, the color of the smokeless powder and the unknown sample matched. A comparison of the lengths of the streaks matched too. The test confirmed Mitchell's suspicions. Smokeless powder was used to blow up the vehicle in Naples, Florida. But scientists in the laboratory could not find any way to link the bomber to the bomb fragments. That evidence would have to come from somewhere else. In Naples, Florida, forensic investigators began to track down the origin of the metal pipe they believed housed the bombs that killed the Bensons. Pipe manufacturers stamp a maker's mark on their products. Fortunately, enough of the logos survived the blast to be identified. Agents traced the pipes to the only company in town that sold that brand. A store employee told investigators that a few days earlier he had sold the pipes to a man wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. The buyer said he worked for the Del Rey Construction Company. Investigators later found out that no such company existed. They took the invoices as evidence. The signatures were nothing more than a scribble, but the paper contained something more revealing. The invoices bore the impressions of a palm print. Could they be the link to the suspect, Stephen Benson? Authorities obtained Benson's own palm prints for comparison. They hoped to find enough points of identification between the two to make a match.
In this case, these palm prints that did come up on these forms are in excellent condition, and the points of identification probably reach near 60 to 75 points of ID. There's no question in anybody's mind that these palm prints are those of Stephen Benson. We have an item we'd like to show you that we...
A background check on Stephen Benson uncovered his fascination with explosives. In a high school yearbook, a dedication he wrote to an old girlfriend read, "I hope to see you this summer, then we can bomb around."
We had developed information that he started experimenting with explosives back many years ago in Pennsylvania. We had talked to witnesses that saw him with firecracker, M80, M100 type of devices, using copper tubing, using remote control to set off some of these firecrackers.
To understand Benson's possible motivation for murder, authorities looked to a financial auditor. The auditor determined that Benson, despite his access to a family fortune, was a terrible businessman. Police discovered that his financial failures were so far-ranging that Stephen started forging checks from his mother's accounts. When Margaret Benson discovered this, she threatened to write Stephen out of her will. Could it be Stephen Benson saw one clear way to get at those millions? Investigators believe Benson used his expertise in electronics to construct the two deadly bombs and the trigger device he used to set them off. On the morning of the bombing, Stephen told everyone he was going to pick up coffee and donuts. But police believe this is when he planted the bombs in the car. Once that was done, all he had to do was trigger the bombs, and a family fortune would be his. Or at least, that's what he planned. After Stephen placed the bombs under the car, he drove back home. He was gone approximately 45 minutes. Carol Lynn, Margaret, Scott, and Stephen set out to drive to the Gulf Coast to survey property for a new house. Carol Lynn reported that Stephen calmly walked side by side with the group, giving no indication of the tragedy he knew he was about to ignite. But as they were all about to get into the car, Carol Lynn noticed something was wrong.
Carol Lynn was able to tell us that the morning they got into the vehicle to leave, that things didn't look right at that point. She noticed that Scott was the driver. That was very rare that Scott was ever the driver. She noticed that Mother was in the front seat. Mother was seldom in the front seat, and that was her place because she got car sick a lot.
According to his plan, Stephen made sure everyone got into the car. Just before they were about to leave, Stephen excused himself to pick up something he'd forgotten. he disappeared inside the house. The investigation into the bombings uncovered the evidence needed to arrest and convict Stephen Benson. He was sentenced to life in prison. Bombs are built from common materials by people with an uncommon thirst for vengeance. Easily concealed, utterly devastating, a bomb can detonate anytime, anywhere. It's this simple truth that makes bombing so challenging to investigators and so chilling for the rest of us. But investigators have the advantage. When a bomber does strike, he always leaves his weapon at the scene of the crime. And with it is the residue of his guilt.
In the fall of 1983, 4 men set out to hunt deer in Virginia. One of them would never return home. Authorities determined the hunter's death was accidental, but an insurance adjuster believed otherwise. A year later, the FBI had only one option. Agents had to get the suspect's confession on tape before their witness also became the hunter's target.
Over 1,000 hunting accidents are reported in the United States each year. Fewer than 10% of them are fatal. But when one hunter's death seemed suspicious, the FBI was called in to investigate. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents would have to determine if their suspect was a grieving father figure or a man who murdered a friend in cold blood.
On November 21st, 1983, near Roanoke, Virginia, 41-year-old David Fisher hunted deer with the 3 people who were closest to him. His 16-year-old stepson, his friend 22-year-old Bobby Mulligan, and 18-year-old David Wilkie. Wilkie looked up to Fisher as the father he never had. The group had been hiking since the early morning, but no one had spotted a deer. $50 was wagered on the first to shoot one. Fisher's stepson was bored and asked to go off on his own. He told him not to go far. The teenager had little experience in the woods. He walked a short distance when he heard someone yell, "Deer." Then he heard a gunshot. The boy ran back to see if anyone had won the $50. He found the group a few yards from where he left them, sitting on the incline of a small hill. 18-year-old David Wilkie had been shot. He was still alive, but they were miles from the nearest phone. Fisher told his stepson to run and get help. 30 minutes later, he reached rescuers. Lieutenant Michael Ashworth of Virginia's Department of Game and Inland Fisheries was called in.
I received a call from the Bedford County Sheriff's Department somewhere around 3 p.m. stating that there had been a hunting accident. I proceeded immediately to the scene It was on the south side of Bedford County off of Stone Mountain Road.
Authorities were too late. David Wilkie died before help could reach him. The lieutenant asked the hunters to describe what happened. Bobby Mulligan said that when they spotted the deer, David Wilkie got excited and ran ahead.
I see it!
Mulligan and Fisher followed behind. As he started down the slope, Mulligan explained that he slipped in the dry leaves. His gun discharged when he hit the ground. To Lieutenant Ashworth, it was clear that Mulligan was a novice with firearms since he had made such a critical error.
I said, you know, you would have had this firearm cocked. And he said, yeah, I did. I was carrying it cocked. When I had heard the deer, then I cocked the gun, which was obvious he was, you know, very ignorant of safety, basic safety rules.
David Fisher told the lieutenant he saw the whole thing happen from the top of the slope. He was behind the two younger men when the shot went off. He saw Wilkie go down and rush to the side of the fallen teenager. He told investigators he placed a rag over the wound in Wilkie's back in an effort to stop the bleeding. The father figure tried to comfort his dying friend until help could arrive. But after only a few minutes, Wilkie stopped breathing. Investigators examined the surrounding area to determine if there was any physical evidence to corroborate their story. Investigators found the spot where Mulligan had slipped.
Hey guys. Take a look here, please. Pretty good shot.
The size of the wound in Wilkie's back seemed consistent with a gunshot fired from where the hunter had hit the ground. Nothing they could find contradicted Mulligan and Fisher's story.
I came running down the path there. I saw a deer and I ran. I slipped and I fell and the gun just went off.
Officials then turned their attention to the weapon that fired the fatal shot.
Yeah, it's the shotgun.
They found that it had been undisturbed since it was last fired. When the lieutenant opened the barrel, he discovered the spent cartridge was still inside. The men were not placed under arrest, but investigators asked them to come to the sheriff's office for further questioning. Authorities were still uncertain if they were going to press charges against the hunters.
Bobby Mulligan seemed to be very sincerely remorseful. He was crying at times and talking about the fact that he had hunted very little. But it looked like that it was exactly as what it appeared to be, a simple hunting accident. And we do have accidents that occur that way.
At the station, the two men were interviewed once more in separate rooms. Their stories never changed. Unlike Bobby Mulligan, David Lee Fisher remained composed and assured his stepson that everything would be okay.
Don't be so. It's not the same.
Since the hunters had inadvertently wandered onto private land, they were charged with hunting on posted property. The man who fired the fatal shot, Bobby Mulligan, was charged additionally with reckless use of a firearm and hunting without a big game license.
Sir, being charged. Hunting without a permit.
The charges were misdemeanors.
Court date. Trespass.
Fisher and Mulligan would need to answer them in court. Until then, they were allowed to return home to Charlotte, North Carolina.
Being charged.
As standard procedure, David Wilkie's body was autopsied. The cause of death was determined to be a transection of the aorta and lacerations of the lungs due to a single projectile. In addition to the 12-gauge slug, the medical examiner extracted cardboard wadding that had also been discharged from the shotgun shell. Examiners confirmed the slug was fired from Mulligan's rifle. A month later, Fisher and Mulligan defended their misdemeanor charges in Virginia's General District Court. The judge gave Mulligan a suspended sentence and fined him $585. Fisher was fined $220. The property officer returned the shotgun to the men, and the case was closed. Two days later, an insurance company received a claim on the dead boy's life insurance. The policy promised to pay $100,000 in the event that Wilkie's death was accidental. Though Wilkie's signature appeared on the forms, he was not the policy's owner. His close friend, David Fisher, was the owner and the sole beneficiary. This wasn't illegal, but it struck the agent as strange since Fisher wasn't listed as the boy's father, nor as his business partner.
John,
The company decided to contest the claim.
This is claiming an accidental death?
On January 6, 1984, they hired independent claims director Harlan Davis to determine if David Wilkie's death was in fact accidental.
They contacted our office and requested that we complete an investigation to determine the relationship between Bobby Mulligan, David Fisher, and David William Wilkie, and also to check police records, obtain a medical examiner's report, and to get in it and develop the circumstances surrounding this death.
Davis attempted to contact Fisher and Mulligan, but the claims director was unable to reach them. He was able to reach Wilkie's single mother in Florida.
This is Diane. Yes.
She told him that her son had left home for Charlotte, North Carolina less than a year before.
Who are you again? Oh.
The 18-year-old had heard that his estranged father was in Charlotte visiting relatives. Wilkie hadn't seen his dad since childhood. His mother said that he caught up with his father briefly, but his dad left Charlotte before they could become reacquainted. The father wanted nothing to do with him. That's when Wilkie met Fisher.
David Wilkie was looking for a father, which he didn't have. His father and mother were separated. They were distant from him. He felt like he wanted to get to know his father, and this is the reason he really fell into a relationship with David Fisher was because he was looking for this father figure, and it became a friendship.
Shortly after her son died, Fisher called to tell her that the teenager wished to be cremated, but had no life insurance. The mother believed Fisher and ordered the cremation, since Fisher seemed to have been close with her son. The claims director finally caught up with David Fisher to ask him why the policy had been purchased.
We'd like to know what
Fisher replied that Wilkie had wanted life insurance because he was planning to get married. His fiancée did not want insurance, so the 18-year-old turned to Fisher. Since Wilkie had no money, Fisher gave him a loan and a job working for him to pay it off.
That he wanted to marry at the job that I got him.
Fisher was the owner and operator of Fisher Services, a small business that employed several people, including Bobby Mulligan. Morgues and mortuaries called Fisher Services when they needed a body transported to their facilities from accident scenes. Fisher and his men worked mostly after 11 p.m. He didn't get paid unless people died. On a good week, the work was lucrative, But when there were no bodies to transport, he needed other ways to get paid.
This is an interesting relationship.
The investigator questioned why Fisher had paid the insurance premium if Wilkie was making income.
The rescue guys thought
The businessman replied that he only wrote the checks to the insurance company after Wilkie paid him first.
Shot someone, and I don't know what else I can tell you.
Fisher had an answer for every anomaly. In spite of Fisher's deflections, the investigator managed to get an important piece of information from him. The new address of Bobby Mulligan, the man who fired the gun that killed David Wilkie. The claims director found Mulligan at a pizza parlor in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
I'd like to talk to you. First of all, would you give me your name, your address?
Mulligan didn't have much to add to what Davis had already heard.
100 Main Street.
The claims investigator concluded his inquiry in the spring of 1984. His firm gave their assessment to the insurance company.
We recommended strongly to them that they not pay the policy and that further investigation be followed up to determine any other information that might shed some light onto this shooting, that it was not exactly as it looked on the surface.
Would you sign
The insurance company sent the case to an attorney in Greensboro, North Carolina. Fisher signed an affidavit vouching that he had seen the deceased sign the policy. The lawyer asked Fisher to describe the shooting one more time. Once again, Fisher indicated that Mulligan was 15 feet behind Wilkie when the gun discharged.
Have you seen what's in
The attorney confronted Fisher with the coroner's report.
You might like to take a look at it.
2 pieces of cardboard wadding from the shotgun shell had been found inside Wilkie's chest. For the wadding to have lodged there, it was likely the shot had been fired from much closer than 15 feet. The evidence was not strong enough to prove murder, but it was strong enough to win a civil suit.
We are prepared to make you an offer.
He offered Fisher $25,000 to settle out of court, the amount the lawyer figured it would cost to defend the case. Fisher accepted.
Now, if you will sign here, please.
They were afraid that if they did not settle the claim for some amount, that David Fisher would possibly sue them for not following the law and paying a claim when he had a legitimate claim.
David Fisher had just made $25,000 from the death of David Wilkie, his friend and employee. The portion of that money he loaned to a friend would soon be paid back in ways he never expected. On a hunting trip to Virginia, 18-year-old David Wilkie's shooting death had been ruled accidental. The man the dead teenager had looked up to, 41-year-old David Fisher, had been paid $25,000 as the sole beneficiary of the boy's life insurance policy. Then, a year and a half later, in the spring of 1985, Special Agent Robert McDowell of the FBI Charlotte Field Office received a call from one of his informants.
Early on in 1985, I had a source, and one day he came to me with a story that a friend of his had been hired and refused to take the job to murder somebody for insurance money. I at first didn't understand exactly why he was bringing me this information and why this individual is willing to talk about this now.
Over the course of 2 more weeks, the agent continued to speak to his source.
Well,
the informant said his friend's name was Bear and that Bear's life was in danger. Agents wanted to speak to this person at the Charlotte FBI field office. But the source said Bear was reluctant since he was an ex-convict. He would only meet them in a neutral place. They agreed to meet in a park. Special Agent James Lillard, who's currently working undercover, helped Agent Bob McDowell develop the case.
Working right beside Bob, we asked me if I wanted to go out with him to interview his source and find out a little bit more about this information.
Lillard would keep watch from a distance in case his partner was being set up. Bear arrived on schedule. His real name was Gerald Stedham. Stedham said that a man named David Fisher was threatening his life because Stedham owed him several $1,000s from a personal loan. He also accused Fisher of murdering 18-year-old David Wilkie more than a year earlier. Agents were skeptical.
When you hear something like that, it initially sounds pretty fantastic, and you kind of scratch your head. You're thinking, is this for real or not? Stedham may have been exaggerating a little bit, and maybe he exaggerated about the story in itself.
Look, I'm not wearing
He hoped the FBI would protect him in exchange for information about his old friend David Fisher. When the agent asked if Stedham was willing to wear a wire to prove the story, the ex-convict refused.
He had his run-ins with law enforcement officers before, and he pretty much said right from the very beginning that he didn't trust police, FBI, or anybody else. So at that point, it was a matter of trying to gain Stedham's trust to the point that he would actually work with us and not back out of the situation once he started getting into it.
Agent McDowell needed to find out more about Fisher. A background check revealed that David Fisher had several aliases and 25 prior convictions for crimes ranging from larceny to forgery. Years earlier, Fisher had testified in the trial of an underworld crime figure and was then entered into the Witness Protection Program. Not long after, his protection was removed since his continuing criminal behavior was in violation of its rules. Agents also checked records in Virginia to confirm Stedham's story.
Yes, there was, in fact, a hunting accident where a gentleman by the name of David Wilkie was shot in the back, supposedly accidentally. So that in itself verified that this definitely happened. Then the next step is to find out if there were any motives here. I mean, why did this happen? And if there was any other details.
McDowell arranged another meeting with Stedham to find out more. Stedham refused to come to the FBI office. Instead, he agreed to meet in the parking lot of a local restaurant. Once again, Stedham promised to tell the FBI anything they wanted to know about Fisher, but refused to wear a wire to secure evidence. If Fisher discovered the wire, Stedham believed he would certainly be killed. He didn't trust that the FBI would protect him if his cover was blown. They were interrupted before McDowell was able to convince him.
I was speaking to him when suddenly screaming and yelling came from a local restaurant. And I realized that there was an armed robbery taking place at the time. And I asked Gerald Stedham just to step off to the side.
Move. FBI!
The thief was stopped by the agent before he could flee.
Get down!
Stedham was speechless. At first, he wondered if the agents had staged the robbery to convince him to cooperate. When he was sure the arrest was real, his attitude towards the FBI changed.
And at that point, I realized that I had gained his trust as somebody who knew what he was doing. So from that point on, it was pretty easy to be able to get Stedham to believe that we were going to protect them and be able to get the information that we needed.
How can I help you?
Well, I really think this meeting can help you out.
At last, Stedham agreed to meet with agents in the FBI offices. For the first time, agents learned the plan Fisher made to kill his young friend David Wilkie. In the summer of 1983, Fisher suggested that he and Stedham, his old prison buddy, could make $100,000 from a life insurance scam. the ex-convict would take out a policy on their young friend David Wilkie if Stedham would do the killing. Despite working several odd jobs, Wilkie was poor and estranged from his family. Fisher believed no one would miss him.
His proposal was to, let's take him out into Virginia, let's take him out to an overlook, and we'll get him near the overlook, and I want you to push him off. And that way he would die, it would look like an accident, and Fisher could collect the insurance money, and which of course he would share with him if he did it.
Well, I'm worried about...
Stedham told agents that he didn't take Fisher seriously until he learned Fisher had obtained the life insurance policy on Wilkie.
And at that point, Stedham said he didn't want anything to do with it. He backed out, which again made Fisher absolutely furious, to the point of almost a hatred developing between his old friend Gerald Stedham and David Fisher.
One day I remember seeing
A few months later, when Stedham heard that Wilkie had been killed hunting in Virginia, he knew the death was probably not accidental. Stedham told agents that Fisher later offered him $50,000 to kill the hitman, Bobby Mulligan. The informant believed that Fisher would likely come after him next.
The unfortunate situation was that Fisher hated Stedham at this point. I mean, actually would probably kill him. So we realized that the only way we were going to be able to get at Fisher through Stedham was to have Stedham tell him that he was sorry that he hadn't paid him back and that he wanted to pay him back even if it's only $100 a week.
$100 a week would give the FBI several opportunities to get Fisher friendly again. Fisher didn't hate Stedham enough to turn down the money. Eventually, agents hoped Stedham could then start reminiscing about what happened in the past. Since the FBI gave Fisher a reason to see their informant, the next step was to get Fisher confessing on tape. A few days later, Fisher asked Stedham to meet him at a coffee shop.
Pick it up. Mr. Stedham, here's what I want you to do.
Stedham was nervous about the wire, but finally agreed to wear it.
Let's do it.
Okay, here we go.
He was terrified, and he was worried that Fisher would frisk him. He was worried that Fisher might get suspicious. So basically, what we advised him to do was to just say, look, tell him that the insurance company is calling him and asking him about this. That way, it'll keep him off the trail of thinking that any law enforcement is involved.
Under the watchful eye of agents, Stedham met with Fisher briefly. The murder suspect said little and avoided the incident in Virginia altogether. Fisher had been an informant himself at one time and suspected Stedham was wired. Outside the restaurant, the mood turned ugly. If agents moved in now, Stedham's cover would be blown. But if they didn't, they feared the suspected murderer would kill again if he found the wire. Agents surveilled murder suspect David Fisher, hoping that their wired informant Gerald Stedham would be able to solicit a confession from his old friend. Fisher arranged the meeting to receive money that Stedham owed him. But Fisher was suspicious of Stedham. To the relief of Stedham and agent James Lillard, Fisher never found the wire.
The first time that we had wired Stedham up and sent him in to talk to Fisher, he was a little too zealous, and he was asking too many poignant questions. So Fisher kind of got a little suspicious and actually frisked him. Fortunately, we had the recording device in a place where he wasn't going to find it.
Unless Fisher called to meet Stedham again, Special Agent Robert McDowell and his team had no other means to get the evidence they needed to arrest Fisher for his 2-year-old crime. 5 days later, Fisher called Stedham to arrange another meeting. Agents were hopeful. The cooperating witness tried to steer the conversation towards Fisher's past crimes, but Fisher once again avoided the topic.
It was one of these situations where Fisher constantly would talk about the fact that he didn't trust anybody, didn't want to talk about anything. Every time Stedham would try to bring up the conversation about what happened back in those days, he would be tight-lipped. He wouldn't do it.
Since Fisher said nothing to corroborate Stedham's version of events, it occurred to agents that perhaps Stedham may be lying, since the ex-convict was reluctant to come forward in the first place.
Yes.
The FBI conducted a polygraph examination to evaluate Stedham's credibility.
Yeah.
Stedham admitted he lied about Fisher, offering him $50,000 to kill Mulligan.
Were you hired to kill Bobby Mulligan? Yes.
He insisted that Fisher had asked him to do it, but he could not remember the exact amount he'd been offered.
But I can't really remember.
Just answer yes or no.
One of the things we did in order to try to make sure we weren't just chasing our tails was to get Stedham a polygraph exam. And the fact that it was non-conclusive could be that there may be some things that he's saying that he's maybe holding back, but in general, what he's stating is pretty much going to be correct.
Agents believe Stedham was still their best hope of getting to Fisher, since the case lacked any physical evidence. But Fisher, the delivery man for the morgues, was extremely cautious, particularly with Stedham. For the case to move forward, the FBI needed another plan.
So what we're going to have to do is create a situation in Fisher's mind where he felt they were closing in on him one way or another, to try to stir the conversation.
Agents figured that Fisher would relax his suspicion of being taped while inside his own vehicle. On a day that Fisher asked Stedham to help him with a job, agents decided the time was right.
Technology was just starting to come out where actually voices would come across on a beeper. And Stedham had one. So we had a female in our office make a phone call to Stedham on his beeper, telling him to call home immediately, making believe that the voice that was coming over the pager was Stedham's girlfriend. So the car stopped, Stedham got out.
For appearances, Stedham briefly spoke to the agent back in the office to let her know the message was received. When Stedham returned to the car, he told Fisher that it was an insurance agent asking to meet Stedham about an ongoing investigation. Fisher told him that if he kept his mouth shut, their new inquiry would go nowhere, since the body had been cremated and that everyone said it was an accident.
He says, and I'm telling you right now, if anybody tries to bring up anything, any witnesses pop their head above the water, it's going to be pow, 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 pow. And those are the sounds that came over the tape. And we realized at that point what Fisher was doing was actually threatening the lives of all witnesses involved in the investigation that took place.
The recording was good, but it was far from a confession. Agents had hoped for more. Unfortunately, over the next several weeks, Fisher avoided Stedham altogether. Agents pursued Mulligan instead. On tape, the shooter described a meeting he had with Fisher after the shooting. Mulligan told him that he had written out the details of what happened and gave it to someone for safekeeping. If Fisher killed Mulligan, those details would be mailed to authorities. Mulligan refused to tell Stedham what he had written or who held the letter. Then, just after midnight on June 16, 1986, an anonymous woman called the FBI to report that a hitman would be coming after Stedham. Agents scrambled to hide their informant at a remote location. They suspected that Fisher had made the threat. Investigators hoped they could secure an arrest warrant before the suspected killer got to Stedham. Fisher had arranged a killing before. Agents feared he would kill again. While agents began to close in on murder suspect David Fisher, the FBI received a death threat against their informant, Gerald Stedham. To protect their key witness, Stedham was held in a remote location until agents could decipher the identity of the caller. Two days later, agents reported their discovery to Stedham.
What is it?
The death threat had been traced to the residence of one of Stedham's friends. Stedham admitted that he had a female friend place the call, but he emphasized that the threat was real. He explained that his longtime friend David Fisher was suddenly acting like a stranger. To Stedham, this could only mean one thing. Fisher, the man who transported bodies for the morgues, was planning to kill him. Agents weren't happy with Stedham's deception, but Agent McDowell knew that the danger to Stedham was genuine.
Stedham told me that Fisher, as a part of being dealing with the morticians and all the different funeral homes, had obtained a number of chemicals that he felt that could be injected into people without them ever knowing, and that they would die without any traces of whatsoever of what caused their death.
The only way to assure Stedham's safety was to get Fisher into custody. Before they could do that, they needed more evidence. In the fall of 1986, a year and a half after the FBI began their investigation, agents finally tracked down David Wilkie's former fiancée. They found her in Florida with a new married name.
What we'd like to do is just begin. Just tell me.
She told agents that she and Wilkie were engaged 6 weeks after they met and planned to move to Florida. To save money, the couple moved in with Fisher for a short time. But after her fiancé was killed, she moved out immediately. She told agents that she felt intimidated by Fisher. Just before Wilkie's death, Fisher had come to her with a proposition to kill the boy for insurance money. Like Stedham, she didn't believe Fisher was serious until Wilkie turned up dead.
What we want to do is, he said, it was get him a few drinks and then give him a good time. I want you to lure him into the pool, get him into the deep end, and then I want you to drown him. And because he can't swim. Then, again, they'll call a hotel security, and it'll look like an accident.
There was something strange about him.
She believed Fisher was responsible for the killing, but she had no way to prove it and feared she could be next.
Well, thank you very much. You've been very helpful. And
we were very surprised. So many people were aware that Fisher was looking for somebody to kill Wilkie. That was incredible. We found it hard to believe that he had gone to that many people regarding some type of scam or some type of setup to murder somebody.
Wilkie's former fiancée had provided a few more pieces of corroborating evidence. Though Special Agent McDowell felt the case still had holes, he believed they had to arrest Fisher and Mulligan before someone else was killed.
We were stretching our luck with David Fisher, knowing the type of person he was, to wind up reaching out and finally making up his mind and killing somebody. We decided that it was time it would be best to go after him, seek indictments, and get him arrested and take him off the street, as well as Bobby Mulligan.
On November 5th, 1986, a Virginia grand jury handed down an indictment charging Fisher and Mulligan with first-degree murder. But with the evidence they had, a conviction was still questionable. McDowell had one last chance to get the taped confession from Fisher that would guarantee a guilty verdict at trial.
I really wanted to try one more time to get Fisher to articulate in detail the fact that he had killed Wilkie for money, and I really would like to have heard a verbal confession from him. And I felt that the only way we could do that was to, you had to escalate his anger. You had to get him to the point where he just lost control, and then we'd start being truthful.
On the night of November 12, 1986, 3 years after Wilkie's death, agents wired Stedham after he had baited Fisher with the promise of some easy cash. Stedham had told him that a bail bondsman whom they both knew had a lead on a suspect who had jumped bail. The bondsman, covertly working for the FBI, would ride along.
There were several locations in which the trio would go. And the plan was that the third individual in the car would be able to get out of the car and leaving Fisher and Stedham alone. And that in between each stop, Stedham would escalate the situation by confronting Fisher straight up.
Everybody who will listen, you sitting there.
Stedham needed to push Fisher to the brink in the hopes that he'd reveal his crime. But if Fisher first discovered that Stedham was an informant, the FBI's key witness might end up dead. The FBI plan to arrest suspected murderer David Fisher had been set in motion, though agents were still uncertain whether they had enough evidence to convict. Their last hope rested with informant Gerald Stedham.
Not be quiet. He keeps talking and talking.
Wearing a wire, Stedham needed to convince Fisher to talk directly about the killing. A bondsman who Fisher believed was checking leads on a fugitive was in fact working covertly for the FBI.
See how he kills him about Mulligan.
When the bondsman left the car, Stedham provoked the suspected killer to react as Agent McDowell had instructed.
Plenty of money. He got overpaid. If anybody lost.
Stedham inside the car had done his job. He really tried to get him cranked up to the point where he would lose control and actually start talking. But Fisher started reverting into that mode of being even more quiet, and we knew at that point that what Fisher was doing was going into his planning mode.
To agents, the risk had become too great. If Fisher discovered Stedham was wired, the key witness, the case, and the arrest would be jeopardized. As planned, at around 11 p.m., Stedham suggested that they report back to the bond office that had supposedly hired them. When they arrived, FBI agents and Charlotte police would be waiting.
Once he got out of the car, he pretty much said to Stedham, in no uncertain terms, I'll see you later. Our units in the area were able to converge in on Fisher and had him pretty much surrounded. He wasn't going to run.
Members of the Charlotte Police Department's fugitive unit arrested Fisher, Stedham, and the other bondsmen. They wanted to remove any suspicion that Stedham and the bondsmen had set Fisher up.
The other part of the plan that night was that we had surveillance teams out following Bobby Mulligan, and we knew where he was going to be located. So after the arrest of Fisher took place, we immediately restaged and set up our arrest phase for Bobby Mulligan.
Agents replaced the tape in the recorder Stedham was wearing. As instructed, Stedham had made arrangements earlier that evening to pick up Mulligan from a club where he worked part-time. It was after midnight when the two of them arrived at a tavern. He persuaded Mulligan to sit at the bar, where they'd be visible to the agents outside in case anything went wrong. When units from the Charlotte Police Department arrived, agents directed them to make the arrest.
Mulligan, you're under arrest. Put your hands on top of
For
your
their
head. Don't
informant's
move.
safety and to encourage Mulligan's cooperation, they arrested both men. Though Mulligan and his former employer, David Fisher, were now in custody, agents still needed one of them to talk about the murder.
We wanted to set it up to the point where David Fisher would be within view of the fact that Bobby Bryce Mulligan was being brought in. And we wanted him to know in certain terms that we had him and we had the shooter, and hopefully to make him realize that he was had.
It didn't work. Fisher declined to be interviewed without an attorney being present. Agents secured a warrant to search the room that Fisher had been renting. Recorded in Fisher's diary, they found a series of cash payments to Mulligan. From a closet, they removed 2 strong boxes. Agents hoped that inside they would find the criminal evidence that could ensure Fisher's conviction. Agents obtained a search warrant and cut the locks.
Okay, our first item.
Inside the first box, they found documents that held David Wilkie's signature.
Manila folder.
They were likely samples used by Fisher to falsify the insurance claim.
Signed and everything, Carmen.
But the evidence was only circumstantial.
This definitely is going to tie this in.
In the other, they found only personal effects, nothing of evidentiary value. It looked like agents would have little else to offer as evidence at trial. A few days later, Agent McDowell got a message that 22-year-old Bobby Mulligan wanted to meet. So far, both Mulligan and Fisher had remained quiet.
But after a couple days of thinking about it and in consultation with his parents, it was apparently Mr. Mulligan's decision that he wanted to come clean about his participation in this murder and felt that it was to his best benefit to be the first to come forward with a confession.
Start with,
Agents interviewed Mulligan at an office in the jail. He confirmed that David Wilkie's death was no accident.
When did you first get contacted by Fisher for this contract?
Mulligan said it all began with Fisher's plan to kill Wilkie's fiancée. Fisher had fronted Wilkie money to romance a young woman, kill her, then collect on her insurance.
Hey, David, I just want to say.
But Wilkie fell in love and backed out.
Try to stay out of the way, okay? Thanks. It won't be that long.
Fisher was furious. To get the money back that he had invested in the teenager, Fisher recruited Mulligan to kill Wilkie for his insurance. Mulligan's story supported Steadham's. Agents finally had the corroborating evidence they'd been pursuing for over a year. Mulligan added that he had tried to call the whole thing off, but Fisher kept pressuring him to shoot Wilkie and get it over with. He said Fisher brought his ex-wife's son along as a decoy. Mulligan maintained that he actually did slip and fall.
I'm fine.
Mulligan claimed that he hadn't intended to kill Wilkie, only injure him. He said it was Fisher who actually murdered the kid.
He believed that it was the finger of David Fisher going into the wound that killed Wilkie, that his own gunshot didn't do it. So he believed that Fisher actually did this. But unfortunately, there was no way of being able to be able to determine that forensically, because Fisher convinced Wilkie's mother in a phone call at least 2 days after the incident happened that it was Wilkie's last request to be cremated.
What was the final contract amount?
He said Fisher had promised him $38,000 to pull the trigger, but ended up paying him only $7,000. David Fisher was tried for first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and murder for hire. Fisher got the death penalty. Mulligan pled guilty to the same charges and was sentenced to life in prison.
I had been a law enforcement officer almost 13 years before I became an FBI agent. And the one thing I did realize from this case is that people can be extremely, extremely cold-blooded and evil, and that there is no remorse whatsoever in their souls, none. And that anytime you hear a story about something not being right, you have to listen to it. You have to listen to them and hear what they have to say, because you never know when something like that could be true.
11 years later, on March 25, 1999, David Lee Fisher was executed by lethal injection.
Fisher?
David Wilkie had considered Fisher his closest friend. But to David Lee Fisher, money was more important than friendship, or even life itself. On this day, a corpse would need to be transported, but this time, it would be Fisher's.
Two 12-year-old boys have been arrested on suspicion of murder after a 19-year-old was stabbed to death in Wolverhampton.
Every day, wake up, you cry, you go to the bathroom. The time you wake up doing anything, my mind on him.
They killed my son like they killing a dog or something, you know? It's brutal.
I couldn't believe that the machete, they killed my son with a long machete like that. I couldn't believe. My skin just, get cold when I see that machete.
I think about the circumstances that led to two 12-year-olds mooching around a park with a knife nearly as long as their legs. Then, yeah, I feel sad about it. I think, what's gone wrong.
Well, the two boys, who cannot be named, are believed to be the youngest people convicted of murder since James Bulger's killers were detained in 1993.
He died innocent, and I lost my son.
Sean Sisahai was born on the island of Anguilla. It's a British overseas territory in the Caribbean which has a population of just over 15,000. The biggest industry is tourism, but while visitors are often wealthy, the people who live there aren't.
Go ahead, paint everything white, the corner.
His father Suresh works in construction. His mother Manaswari is a housekeeper at some of the many luxury villas. Sean was born in 2004.
He make us keep laughing, enjoy him. From that day he born, we were so joyful, have a first baby in our life. We're so happy that now we became a family, But Sean was really wonderful growing up.
As a little baby, it was the best thing for me to know that I have a son as my first child. And we always happy about him. It was gorgeous, just playful, laughing, always be happy.
So after when he started to grow now, he started to talk, he see the plane. And he said, Mommy, I want to be a pilot, I want to be a pilot. And he keep, talking, but after then he changed. After then he say he want to be an engineer.
He was always in sports. He always play basketball, he always play cricket. So he always be, physical. He always worked with me on weekend. And he decided to want to be an engineer. He said, Daddy, I like the work you do. I want to be an engineer. I want to be an architect. I want to help you out because I build house on foundation. He said, we could work as a team that I draw the plan, you read the plan, you build the house.
The family live in Anguilla's capital, the Valley, which has a population of less than 4,000, about the size of a British village. Sean loved playing basketball. This was one of the many courts he played on.
Sean was a lovely boy. Initially when I met him, he was very quiet. And then as we got to know each other, he came out more. And he liked to joke around a lot. He was like the jokester on the teams. Basketball was a good escape for Sean. That was his happy place. He liked to be on the court.
He started out being a very timid player. Not because he couldn't play, but I think being a shy person, he was afraid to really express himself on the court. But as he grew in confidence, he showed what he can really do on the court.
But it was a basketball injury that set in train a sequence of events that would ultimately have tragic consequences.
He always say, his eye paining him, his eye paining him. I say, how your eye paining? He said, I had hit when I was playing basketball.
He'd suffered a very serious injury, a detached retina, and travelled to the United States for surgery. But his visa ran out, so in 2023 he came to the UK for further treatment.
I think when he left here and he was in the UK, his plan was to make the most of it, like to take advantage of the opportunities.
At that time, he was living in Birmingham. I went there, spent the 3 months with him and make sure the surgery done and everything done, and then I came back.
Things were looking up. His eye problems were almost behind him, and he hoped to stay in the UK to study engineering. On November the 13th, 2023, Sean and his childhood friend Darren Harrigan travelled from Handsworth in Birmingham to meet some other friends in Wolverhampton. It was there that a chance encounter would cost him his life. Their movements were filmed on CCTV. First travelling by tram, then walking to the Stowlawn playing fields. They stopped at a nearby shop to buy some drinks. This was the last image of Sean alive. They returned to the park and walked past a bench where 2 young boys and 2 young girls were sitting. There was an altercation. It's not known what caused it, but it was more than likely over something trivial. One of the boys produced a large machete. As Darren and Sean tried to escape, Sean fell and was repeatedly stabbed by the 2 boys. He died where he fell.
I was the on-call homicide senior investigating officer on the 13th of November last year. I received a call telling me that a young lad had been stabbed in Wolverhampton and that he'd unfortunately passed away. When I got there, I learnt that the young man who had died was called Sean Ceasahai. I also learnt that friends of Sean had rang his parents back in Anguilla, and they were actually on the phone to them there at that time saying Sean's been killed.
I left shock. After I hear that call and they say Sean gets stabbed, I don't know what happened after. I think maybe I threw the phone down. I can't remember what happened. I left in shock.
She said, what? Sean gets stabbed. She started to say, Sean gets stabbed? And she started crying. So I took the phone from her and I asked the guy, I said, what happened? He said, Sean passed away. I said, you sure that Sean passed away? He said, yes.
Well, I dropped. I just dropped. I couldn't believe it. And when my husband said Sean passed away, Sean dead, I don't know what happened after.
I had my sister, and the next sister was here visiting us from Antigua. And they all started to cry.
I want to know what happened to my son, why that happened. And then someone just come and take his life away just like that.
Within minutes, news was spreading across Anguilla. So many people knew Sean and his family.
I was in disbelief at first. I brushed it off like nonsense. And then when I realized there was some truth about it and it sank in, I said, oh, wow. And I couldn't believe it. It was very saddening. It was very saddening for the family and for the neighbors, we from the same apartment, and the community that he resided in.
I drove straight to the parents' house, and seeing everybody there, then I knew it was true. But it's just sad because he never had that opportunity to fulfill or live to his full potential. With all the obstacles he had, this was his time.
You know, when you get this shocking news from about someone you know, it takes a while to register and you're going through all the different emotions. You're like, but he's in the UK, he's trying to make a better life, he's trying to progress. It's a myriad of emotions that just went through me when I heard the news about Sean.
In Anguilla, we say, you know, the devil's working overtime. We just wonder what's going on. What's really happening to our youth? Why is it happening? I want to know the why.
My team had hit the ground running. We were doing the solid building blocks of an investigation, following up on CCTV, following up on witness accounts, house to house. The first priority of my investigation was to identify the suspects.
CCTV coverage of the park was poor, so although police quickly retrieved this footage, it's impossible to see exactly what happened. Investigations continued, and a breakthrough came when a parent called the police to say their daughter had important information and would like to talk.
We were given some details in relation to one, that an assault had been witnessed, that a knife had been used, and that there were two young men, boys, who had been responsible and involved in that attack. What my officers and the intelligence was telling us is that these two boys were 12 years old, and that obviously was a point at which you could look at the investigation and think, well, it's changed now a little. This is something that is new.
What did you think when you heard that they were 12 years old?
I've investigated murders and homicide and major incidents for a long time, but it was a surprise. A 12-year child to get a weapon like that, they ain't supposed to hold something like that. Just 12 years old, I left shocked when I see them too, and when I heard that. I couldn't believe. You know, nobody deserved to die like that.
As they went to see the 12-year-olds, officers very quickly made an important discovery.
I was told that we'd recovered a blood-stained machete, large machete-style knife, and a sheath from under the bed of one of the suspects.
In the meantime, the eyewitnesses, that's Darren Harrigan and the two girls, had given statements which gave investigators a picture of what had happened. Their versions of events differed slightly, but they agreed that there'd been some kind of confrontation.
Words were had which escalated into an argument, and then as they argued, one of the suspects pulled out a knife, and the confrontation had turned physical. And whilst Daron and Sean both tried to run away, upon seeing the knife, Sean was caught and he was stabbed, and he was left there to die on the playing field. We conducted a forensic post-mortem of Sean after he died, and we found that he had multiple stab wounds across his body. Significantly, he had a large stab wound to the back of his skull that had actually cut into the bone and left a burr. He also had in his back a 23 centimetre deep stab wound which went through his chest and pierced his heart.
The 12-year-olds were both arrested and charged with Sean's murder. On the morning of November the 17th, they appeared at Birmingham Magistrates Court. Because of their ages, they can't be identified. Their families crowded into the public gallery as both boys, looking tiny in the court setting, confirmed their names and addresses and were remanded in custody. Soon after, they found more evidence.
We recovered phone handsets from both suspects, and they were of the suspect posing with the knife that we'd later recovered, and we could date them as being in the early hours of the morning of the offence, so i.e. he would have posed with those photos, gone to bed, had his day, and then later gone out and been involved in the fight where he killed Sean.
More crucial information was gleaned from the phones. There was a Snapchat conversation between the boys and the girls who'd been there, which began the morning after Sean was killed. It started with a video of the park taken the previous evening, along with the message, "Someone got stabbed." Then one of the groups said, "We know." An hour later there were more messages, everyone's talking about it, then literally everyone, at which point the boy who owned the machete left a voice note saying, "It is what it is." His friend replied, "I'm scared, man," to which the boy responded, "I'm not," and added IDRC, which means I don't really care. Next came a voice message from the boy who'd said he was scared. Part of it was inaudible, but he could be heard saying, "I ain't said now because every time I talk about it, like I act weird apparently."
When you, again, layered all that evidence together, you could have some confidence that the person using that phone, which we would say was the suspect, had some knowledge of what had gone on.
It was 12 days before the Cesarhais could make it to the UK, but when they arrived, they went to Stow Lawn and held a candlelit vigil for Sean. The boys went on trial at Nottingham Crown Court. Because of their ages, special arrangements were put in place.
It is about making sure that it's a sound conviction, that the defendants have no choice but to accept that they've been treated fairly, given every opportunity, and the evidence still stands.
It took place in one of the smallest courtrooms at Nottingham to make it less intimidating for the boys. The judge, barristers and court staff didn't wear robes or wigs, and the defendants sat in the well of the court, not the dock. Alongside them were specially trained staff who could help explain what was going on, and each boy had a family member beside them for emotional support.
So the conclusion that the jury reach, guilty or not guilty, is sound and beyond reproach, and there's no risk that you end up having to have a retrial.
Suresh and Manaswari travelled to the UK for the trial and sat in court behind the defendants.
I understand the court is small, but at least should put us in front. We come from all the way in the Caribbean, and then we go sit at the back of the court. I don't like it.
Imagine the situation where you're having to come halfway across the world to an unfamiliar place, to an unfamiliar justice system, to talk about the most horrific thing that's happened to one of the most important people, if not the most important person in your life.
As the trial opened, Michelle Healy KC for the prosecution showed the murder weapon to jurors. It was 42.5 centimetres long, that's nearly 17 inches.
I couldn't believe that the machete, they killed my son with that long machete like that. I couldn't believe. My skin just, get cold when I see that machete. That 12-year, have that long machete like that and just use it in somebody so brutal.
If someone stab you with that, you really have to be very lucky to survive.
During the trial, the 12-year-olds blamed each other. each describing how an apparently trivial shoulder barge had provoked the attack. The jury began its deliberations on Wednesday, June the 5th. The following Monday, a note was sent to the judge to say they'd reached unanimous verdicts.
We have just heard that two 12-year-old boys have been found guilty of the murder of 19-year-old Sean Cisahay.
Well, the two boys, who cannot be named, are believed to be the youngest people convicted of murder since James Bulger's killers were detained in 1993.
I was very, very nervous. But when they come out and they say guilty, I was so happy. I was so happy. I know I can't see Sean again, but at least we get some kind, they find them guilty.
I knew in my heart of hearts that the two defendants sat in that dock were responsible for murdering Sean, and I wanted to see them face justice for that. Sean's family will always stand out to me as a particularly dignified and resolute set of people, and so I really, for them, wanted to see justice done. I wanted them to have the confidence that even though their son was in a country halfway around the world, that we cared, that someone would secure justice for him, someone would go to bat for him, in simple terms.
The Cisahays spent so much of their savings on coming to the UK for the trial that they couldn't afford to come back for sentencing and have received no financial help.
I think that the government is supposed to contribute, because my son didn't do nothing. He died innocent. And all what we work for go down the drain. Plus we lose a lot of work.
And you lost your son.
And I lost my son. And it's not something easy to lose. I don't care much about the money, but what I lost I can't get back.
Because they couldn't be there, the Cisahays' victim statement was read out in court by the Anguillan government's representative in the UK, Dorothea Hodge. In it they said, "It has left a huge hole in the pit of our stomachs which nothing can fill. We're devastated as a family, totally heartbroken." They went on to describe the close bond Sean had had with his younger sister Shana and the impact his death had had on her mental health. "The impact on us as a family is devastating. It's hard to believe that we will ever come to terms with what has happened. We will never get to see Sean get married or have a family of his own. All of these things have been taken from us, for what appears to be no reason at all." The next day, the boys, who were both now 13, returned to court to be given their sentences. We learned the first had been groomed and trafficked and led into criminality, while the other was regarded as more mature with a greater understanding of what happened.
Murder is the most serious criminal offence, and the sentence is fixed by law. There is only one sentence I can give the defendants in this case, and because of their age, it is called detention during His Majesty's pleasure.
They were told they could be released after serving 8.5 years in custody. However, they will remain on licence for life. The Cisahays believed that the sentence was too lenient and didn't reflect the severity of the crime.
I know it eating my husband inside. Every single day he always say, it's so hard he can't see his son again. But I just want good justice for my child. I really want good justice for my son. I just hope and pray that we get good justice for him.
3 days before the boys were sentenced, new legislation came into effect banning the sale of weapons of the type used to kill Sean. Tens of thousands of weapons were also handed in during an amnesty.
The impact of knife crime is devastating, no matter where you live in the country. This is an issue that affects us all. Sean was only 19 when his life was taken at the hands of two boys, then aged just 12, who had armed themselves with a machete. That reality has had a huge impact on us all. It is both shocking and saddening.
Well, the knife crime is really right. And they have to stop it.
Back in Anguilla, Sean's death has had a huge impact on a close-knit community.
There's so many victims and so many people hurting. I mean, we have an island hurting. There's nearly everybody, he lived in the valley. Everybody in the valley, all the youth, they're very upset.
Being in such a small island, you hear a lot of stories before you actually hear the truth. And that makes it even shocking because you're trying to now understand, okay, how do a 12-year-old have these weapons? What would provoke a 12-year-old to, take a life?
We did not only lose Sean, but we also lost the two young boys who had a whole future in front of them, and that was what it came to. And Sean had lost his life, and these youngsters also lost their lives. So their parents, I believe, would also be in some sort of mourning, just as Sean's parents were.
Sean's mother often returns to his favourite beach, where they shared many happy memories, and where, after his body had been repatriated and cremated, they scattered his ashes.
It's so hard right now. I can't even explain it, but it's very hard now. It brings back all memory. From the day he died and everything I did, and bring his ash and lose it, it's so hard. There's only one son I have, and that pain is very, very hard. I only have one, not anymore, just him alone. Every day, wake up, you cry, you go to the bathroom. The time you wake up doing anything, my mind on him. Anyway. And then come today now and come back and see where I lose his ash, make it even worse.
khôi bạt ngàn trong các vườn đồi dưới chân ngọn núi Dành. Những chùm hoa sâm nam nở rộ trong các vườn đồi dưới chân ngọn núi Dành ở xã Liên Trung và Việt Lập, huyện Tân Yên, tỉnh Bắc Giang. Nhắc đến cây sâm, mọi người đều nghĩ đến giá trị bổ dưỡng cao từ củ sâm lâu năm. Nhưng ít ai biết rằng hoa sâm cũng là một món quà quý giá cho sức khỏe của người dùng. Đặc biệt là hoa sâm nam núi Dành là một sản phẩm được thu hoạch hái trực tiếp từ cây sâm nam núi Dành nhiều năm tuổi, được người dân sử dụng như một loại trà axit, trà thảo dược với nhiều lợi ích cho sức khỏe con người, có các loại axit hữu cơ, axit amin, khoáng chất. Đặc biệt là trong hoa sâm nam núi Dành có hoạt chất saponin rất có ích với cơ thể sống. từ sớm tinh mơ trên các vườn đồi dưới chân núi rành, người nông dân trồng hoa sâm nam đã trò chuyện dân gian nhộn nhịp thu hoạch nụ hoa sâm nam núi rành. Những nụ hoa sâm nam vẫn còn đẫm sương mai, chỉ được thu hái từ sáng sớm nhằm đạt chất lượng cao nhất, và khi mặt trời lên cao thì sẽ không khai thác được nữa. Nụ hoa sau khi vừa thu hái được tuyển chọn cẩn thận, chế biến qua nhiều công đoạn sao nhiệt vừa đủ để những nụ hoa sâm còn nguyên hình hài và giữ được tinh chất trời núi rành, tinh chất đất trời núi rành. Tương truyền trong dân gian, vào đời vua Tự Đức nhà Nguyễn, nhờ có sâm nam núi rành là chữa lành mắt cho mẹ vua. Kể từ đó, sâm nam núi rành trở thành một thứ đặc sản tiếng vương nổi danh đất Bắc. Những nụ hoa sâm nam căng mọng sẽ được thu hoạch về để sơ chế danh lam hàng năm. Sâm nam núi rành ra hoa tạo hạt vào khoảng cuối tháng 8 đến tháng 10. Hoa sâm tươi được sấy khô làm trà. Ngoài ra, hoa sâm có thể ăn sống, nấu chín thành những món ăn rất bổ dưỡng. Mỗi hecta đất sâm 2 năm tuổi trở lên sẽ cho khoảng 3 đến 4 tấn hoa tươi, bán với giá 50 triệu đồng một tấn, thu nhập 150 đến 200 triệu đồng một năm. Hoa sấy khô làm trà có giá khoảng 800.000 đồng đến 1 triệu đồng một kg. Ông Thân Hải Đăng, giám đốc hợp tác xã sản xuất và tiêu thụ sâm nam núi rành Việt Lập chia sẻ, năm 2020, ông cùng 11 thành viên trong xã Việt Lập đã đi đầu tư thành lập hợp tác xã để đưa vào hoạt động trồng, sản xuất, tiêu thụ các sản phẩm từ sâm nam núi rành được quy mô và bài bản. Hiện nay hợp tác xã có khoảng hơn 10 hecta trồng sâm, sản xuất 4 loại sản phẩm chính là sâm nam núi rành khô, rượu ngâm sâm, sâm ngâm mật ong, nụ hoa sâm khô. Người trồng sâm nam được cả mùa hoa, tính riêng hợp tác xã đạt thu được khoảng 1,6 đến 1,8 tấn hoa sâm khô thành phẩm và trà. Thì giá bán hiện nay khoảng 800.000 đồng đến 1 triệu đồng một kg, thu về khoảng 1,4 đến 1,5 tỷ đồng trên vụ. Đặc tính của cây sâm nam núi rành cho khai thác nhiều hoa nhất ở năm 2 và năm 3. Nhiều hộ gia đình đổi đời giàu lên từ đầu tư phát triển trồng sâm nam núi rành, điển hình như gia đình ông Nguyễn Tiến Mạnh, thành viên hợp tác xã trồng khoảng 1,4 hecta sâm nam núi rành. Cứ 2 ngày gia đình ông Mạnh thu hái nụ hoa sâm một lần, được khoảng 0,2 đến 2,0 đến 2,5 tạ hoa sâm tươi. Sau khi chế biến sấy khô đạt từ 30 đến 50 kg hoa khô làm trà. Hoa sâm này gia đình ông thu hoạch tính 7 tạ trà hoa sâm khô trị giá khoảng trên 600 triệu đồng. Mấy năm gần đây, bà con nông dân trồng cây sâm nam núi rành trên địa bàn hai xã Việt Lập và Liên Trung nhờ tâm huyết áp dụng biện pháp khoa học kỹ thuật đầu tư cho cây sâm nam núi rành vệ sinh phát triển, rồi trở thành vùng dược liệu quý, đem lại nguồn thu nhập phát triển kinh tế từ việc bán hoa sâm củ và cây sâm giống, thu về hàng chục tỷ đồng mỗi năm.